Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. Today, we're continuing on in Chapter 1, Lesson 2, The Young Republic. So, like me, I'm still young. Let's share the screen. It's in the middle. Come on, Mr. Ovalle. Noob. All right. Here we go. The Young Republic, Chapter 1, Lesson 2. All right, that was your warm-up. Objectives, we're going to describe the features of the government set up under the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. We're going to identify key events that are leading up to ratification of the Constitution, and we're going to describe the challenges faced by the young United States while adjusting to the constitutional government. And we're going to analyze the growth of national pride. All right, a new republic is born. Remember that before the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution, states had their own governments, government officials, their own currencies, and their own laws. But with the republic, it replaced royal rule, no more kings, no more queens, with a republic. Power in a republic resides with the citizens who are entitled to vote and elect leaders who must govern according to the laws of the Constitution. You have the separation of powers. We talked about that last video, executive, legislative, judicial powers. Also, the republic comes with a bicameral legislature, two-house government, two-house legislature. The Senate represents the people of property. The Assembly protects rights of the common people. Assembly, House of Representatives is what it is today. I see them changes. So the revolution left a strong spirit of equality and freedom. The quest for freedoms led to greater separation between church and state, separate the religions. In Virginia, there was no official church and the state couldn't collect taxes to support the church, meaning before then, the state did collect taxes to support the church. Let's separate that. And voting rights were expanded to every white male taxpayer. The Articles of Confederation, just so you know, it's an epic failure. As states were creating their own constitutions individually, political leaders wanted to create a central government that held the country together. March 2nd, 1781, I believe the Continental Congress created the framework of the AOC, Articles of Confederation. However, under the Articles of Confederation, which is our first constitution, there were no separate branches of government, and Congress had limited powers. The states did not want to create a national government that might become too tyrannical. Again, they've had experience with tyrannical governments. They did not want that to happen. Here's a picture of the Articles of Confederation. Here's a video I would show, but for copyright issues, I'm not going to do that. Pitfalls and achievements. Under the AOC, there was largely failures. Each state had one vote in Congress. Congress, however, could act in certain areas. It wasn't all just bad. They could negotiate with other nations, raise armies, declare war. But they couldn't impose taxes or regulate trade. Again, coming from a government a previous government that taxed all the time, they didn't want that happening with their government. The only success, maybe you should make a star this highlight, the only success coming from the Northwest Ordinance was it laid out plans settling the west of the Appalachian Mountains and the area north of the Ohio River. It's called the Northwest Ordinance. They figured out how statehood could be achieved because of this document. So what am I talking about there? I'm talking about this area right here. That used to be the Northwest. More AOC. Oh, you can't see here because of my face. Here you go. Not talking about the politician AOC. The Articles of Confederation. Congress lacked power with trade policies. They lacked uniform policies and had no authority to intervene. The country is going to go through a recession in the early 1700s, or early 1780s, shortly after, becoming a new country. So the whole rigmarole of it all, Congress couldn't collect taxes to raise money and get the country out of debt. They had to use the state's own currencies, which weren't equal. And that's going to hit poor farmers real bad. Speaking of poor farmers, Shay's rebellion, this happens to go with it. Massachusetts farmer Daniel Shays went bankrupt. He is going to lead 1,200 followers to protest these new taxes. However, the state militia was quickly sent to quell the rebellion in its tracks. And what the AOC lacked was purely evident, and people didn't like the way the country was heading. People started calling for a stronger central government. Even though they didn't like it, it had to happen. Here's Daniel Shay's Rebellion. A new constitution. So the purpose of this new constitutional convention was to revise the AOC Articles of Confederation in Philadelphia. Delegates from each state except RI, Rhode Island, decided to abandon rewriting the Articles of Confederation and start straight from scratch. It's known as the Constitutional Convention. George Washington was the presiding officer. Everyone agreed. Main big wigs there were Ben Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, etc., etc. A lot of the founding fathers. So here you have to split or not to split. All delegates there wanted a stronger government, national government with power to levy taxes and to make laws that would bind the states together. The debate started whether each state should have one equal vote in Congress or not. Small states agreed. It kept the bigger states out of it. Large states did not. And large states wanted representatives in Congress based on population. So you have something called the Great Compromise. It was a committee to resolve. The compromise was created. The solution was given by Roger Sherman of Connecticut, CT, Connecticut. Congress would be divided into two houses. The House of Representatives, number of reps based on population. The Senate was one vote. Each state had equal representation. It's also called the Connecticut Compromise because, Sherman was from Connecticut. But this sparked a new question. What about slaves? So the first plan, the small state plan, the New Jersey plan, one house, equal representation supported by smaller states who feared losing power in the federal government. The Virginia plan, the two-house legislature, representation to Congress based on population supported by the larger states, of course. And the Great Compromise is a combination of the two. The 3/5 compromise. So what do you do about slaves, right? So slave-holding states want to know if their slaves would count towards a state's population, therefore adding more representatives and more power in the House. The compromise was finally settled, counting for every 5 slaves a state had, it would count as 3 votes for representation and taxation purposes. They also agreed to end the slave trade, the Atlantic slave trade, in 1808. My face is in the way. Icon has framework. Hopefully you get this. With compromises settled, they now focus on the new details of the government. There's a principle of popular sovereignty, the rule by the people. And it's going to create a representative democracy here in America. They wanted to strengthen the central government and respect the states. So they came up with a system of federalism. Federalism is the power divided between federal and state governments. All right. I don't know if this shows on the video, but maybe it does. Sorry. Remember Montesquieu, separation of powers among three branches of the federal government. You have two houses of Congress making up the legislative branch. They make the laws. They elected a president, executive branch, who implements and enforces laws Congress passed. CIC duties, commander-in-chief, head of the army. And then there's also a system of courts, the judicial branch, who interprets federal laws and gives judgments. So here you got the three powers: legislative branch, House of Representatives, Senate. You got the president and vice president and the Supreme Court. Checks and balances. So each branch was to monitor or limit the power of the other two, give a check. So some examples are, you don't have to write these down, they're just examples. So a president could check Congress by vetoing a law. The House, if they don't like his veto, gives a two-thirds of the House of Representatives needs to override the veto. The Senate can yes or no, yay or nay, a presidential appointee in the executive branch. They can also agree on treaties. Congress can impeach high-ranking officials in the executive branch and judicial branches, i.e., Trump being impeached not once, twice. Well, you can see my finger. So the House can formally accuse. The trial is held in the Senate. If guilty, they are removed. And as we know, he wasn't, so he was not removed from office. More examples. The judicial branch can hear all cases arising under federal laws and the Constitution. The powers of the judiciary are counterbalanced with the executive and legislative branches. The president can nominate judges, like the Chief Justice in the Supreme Court, but the Senate can approve or disapprove of their nominations. Judges serve for life to ensure independence from the executive and legislative branches. Amendments. So the Constitution may need to be revised over time. Do you think that was smart or not? I think yes. They needed to have a clear system of having amendments. Amendments are changes. All right. There, you would need a proposal and you would need it to be ratified. It'd have to be proposed by 2/3 of Congress supporting the amendment. They can call a new convention to add new amendments. However, you need 3/4 of Congress or 3/4 of state legislatures in conventions to approve this. So, meaning they wanted to make amendments difficult to pass. So then there becomes the debate of the ages. They proposed this Constitution was finally finished. Okay. And 9 of the 13 states would be needed to ratify or approve this. So you have two main groups, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Federalists were supporters of the Constitution. Constitution. They emphasized that the Constitution would create a federal system divided between state and central governments. Usually, large landowners wanted property protection, merchants, artisans, farmers who depended on trade. They also believed the federal government could impose taxes on foreign goods or regulate interstate trade to help businesses. I'm sorry, there aren't any pictures. Anyways, Anti-Federalists were those, they weren't truly against the Constitution. That's not what it means. However, they had other beliefs. Their main concern is who's going to reign supreme, the federal or state government? Who got the one up? And they said that this new Constitution needed a Bill of Rights, the rights of the people. Where are they? It doesn't say. So, Alexander Hamilton, enter Alexander Hamilton. The Federalist were 85 anonymous essays written in support of the Constitution, written by 3 main authors, James Madison, John Jay, and they were mainly written all by Alexander Hamilton. And the purpose of the Federalist was to explain how the Constitution was supposed to work and what the framers wanted to achieve. In 1791, Massachusetts got assurances of a Bill of Rights being talked about. So here you got some more pictures. Here is Lin-Manuel Miranda, aka Hamilton, his play, or the real Alexander Hamilton. I believe he's over here on the right. The Federalist Papers, John Jay, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton. All right. So stupid Virginia and your stubbornness. These state populations comprise of 30% of the total population of the entire country, these two states. They were heavily anti-federalists. Close calls came in both states, but in the end, they both approved the Constitution. A little side note, the Federalist Papers were mainly sent to states who were very anti-federalist heavy. In 1989, North Carolina held out until the Bill of Rights was officially passed. In 1790, Rhode Island ratified it, and now all 13 states were in agreement. So the Constitution was finally in place. GW, George Washington, was our first president. Yeehaw. Here's the Constitution, we the people. You guys know that, opening right. Here's the Constitutional Convention. George Washington. All right, so Washington making changes. The first task was to organize the government. So he created the three departments of Department of State, Department of Treasury, and the Department of War, as well as the Office of the Attorney General. Need a lawyer. So he chose his cabinet. Basically, they are individuals who would lead these departments. So Thomas Jefferson is Secretary of State, Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury. Then 1789, the Judiciary Act was created, which creates the Supreme Court and established lower federal courts. John Jay, the first Chief Justice. Remember those anti-federalists? Well, they proposed amendments to the Constitution detailing the rights of the American citizens. December 1791, Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments for the Constitution were added. After establishing the Bill of Rights, now the government's kind of organized, the rights of the people are organized, and now the economy needs to be reorganized. And so the country had an inherited debt from the Continental Congress, aka the revolutionary leaders, the revolutionary government. So Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury, in charge of the money, proposed an idea to fix it. The federal government should take on the responsibility of all states' debts and the creation of a national bank to manage the country's finances. Now, if you know any history about that, you know who ain't gonna like it. Here are the Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Here's a simpler term. If you want to pause it to read it, there you go. So you have enumerated versus implied. So Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and others did not want a national bank. It was not a part of the federal government's enumerated powers, meaning powers specifically stated in the Constitution. That's going to be a test question, so you should star that. Enumerated powers. So because it's not written in the Constitution verbatim to create a national bank, Congress cannot, the federal government cannot create a national bank. Alexander Hamilton justified by quoting the necessary and proper clause in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, quote, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper. So this invokes or creates the implied powers, powers not specifically stated in the Constitution. Everyone knew that creating a national bank was needed to collect taxes, to regulate trade, and to provide for the common defense. That is Alexander Hamilton's argument. The results, eventually, Alexander Hamilton wins his financial program. He made a promise to Southern congressmen that the nation's capital would be moved to the District of Columbia, which was land donated by both Virginia and Maryland. Remember, District of Columbia is not a state. The Bank of the United States was created in 1791, and for a 20-year period. So the rise of political parties. There are two political parties following this. You have the Federalists, who was, the party of Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and then you have the Democrat Republicans. Federalists are those who favored strong central government led by the rich, well-born, and able. They were manufacturers, merchants, and bankers. They believed manufacturing was the basis of national wealth, especially in the Northeast. James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, leaders of the Democrat Republican Party, favored strict limits on the federal government's power and protection of the states' rights, and supported agriculture over commerce and trade. There was a strong base of support among Democrat Republicans in the South and the West, especially among rural farmers. Why is my picture not showing up? There's my picture. I don't know why it's like that. John Adams, he's the second president. And he was a fellow Federalist. He replaces George Washington after his 2 terms end. And one of his most urgent challenges was to avoid war with France. France was mad about the treaty between the United States and Great Britain, so they started seizing ships at sea. Negotiations brought an end to an undeclared war in 1800. I think it's known as the XYZ affair. The division amongst politicians is going to deepen. Federalists are going to resent the Democrat Republicans' criticisms. Using a majority, they will pass the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. Sedition, can't say anything bad about a politician. So the election of 1800, you could call it the Revolution of 1800. I'm not going to call it that. Some books do. John Adams did not win any popularity with the passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts. The new winner, however, was unclear. Thomas Jefferson unexpectedly tied with Aaron Burr, his actual running mate for vice president. As we know about Aaron Burr, you know what he did. So in setting up this new government and elections, the Electoral College was created. Representatives and senators from states were to vote, and they're the only ones where the votes matter. The most votes at this time, back in the day, the most votes became president. The second most votes was the vice president. Do you think that would have worked out great nowadays if, regardless of who won, if, first place was Joe Biden and second place was Donald Trump, do you guys think they would work together? Probably not. Vice versa. Even with Hillary Clinton coming in second to Donald Trump, you think they would have worked well together? No. John Kerry working well with Obama? Probably not. It has its flaws. If it ever came to a tie, the House would decide. And in this case, there's the tie. It goes to the House of Representatives. They choose Thomas Jefferson. And because of that, Thomas Jefferson, Democrat, Republican, anti-federalist, and against the Federalist Party, Federalists are going to step down in the Army and Navy. Good luck, TJ. However, the reason why it's sometimes called the Revolution of 1800 is the election established that power could peacefully be transferred despite political disagreements. Almost like the, I can't think of it. It was in English history. I'm so sorry. I can't remember that. Anyways, this is going to lead to the 12th Amendment, the separate ballot for both the president and the vice president. As Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson found it tough to limit the federal government's power and judiciary to avoid another war with Great Britain over new lands due to this continued expansion. He came to Washington, D.C. to limit the scope of the federal government. That's not what the anti-federalists wanted. The Democrat Republicans wanted. So they started paying off the national debt, cut government spending, cut the whiskey tax, and trim the armed forces. Man, can you believe if that happened today? On the last day in office, however, John Adams appointed new Federalists to be judges, knowing that judges serve for life. Thomas Jefferson wanted the Democratic Republic Congress to weaken the judges' powers. So he withheld paperwork confirming such appointments, such as Federalist William Marbury did not receive his, and there's a whole issue with that. Marbury takes his matter to the Supreme Court. Chief Justice John Marshall and his colleagues sympathized with Marbury. However, it could not issue an enforcement order and stated that such a law authorized the court to write such orders was unconstitutional, basically saying we can't do this because we aren't granted this power, so we're going to create this power of deciding that it's unconstitutional. The whole rigmarole, right? The result, you need to know this, Marbury versus Madison, the result asserts the right of judicial review in 1803, meaning the Supreme Court now has the power to decide whether or not laws are constitutional or unconstitutional and to strike down those that aren't. So Chief Justice John Marshall will remain in court as Chief Justice for 30 more years and made the Supreme Court a powerful independent branch of the federal government. There he is in all his glory. Westward Expansion. We're almost done. The Treaty of Paris established the United States boundaries to the Mississippi River. The Treaty of Greenville in 1795, Native Americans lost all in the Northwest Territory. Kentucky and Tennessee would soon become new states under the terms of George Washington. Ohio followed in 1803. And in 1800, Spain, if you recall from the last video, Spain owned, the Louisiana Territory. Spain gave back that Louisiana territory to France. And then in order to finance his goals for European conquest and world conquest, Napoleon is going to sell that territory and New Orleans to the United States in 1803. And this is kind of a little hypocritical of Thomas Jefferson because he is in power expanding the growth of the federal government, even though he himself wanted to limit the federal government's power. Anyways, they will pay $11.25 million and assume French debt of $3.25 million it owed to the American citizen. So a whopping total almost close to $15 million. And this is known as the Louisiana Purchase. Louisiana Territory is the land. The purchase is the exchange of money. That's not exchange of money. I don't know why I did that. And here you go. This is the new America. James Madison. Told you we're almost done. He took office in 1809. He first tackled the economic issues. The British were regularly seizing American ships and kidnapped sailors to serve in their navy. American settlers in the West also accused the Brits of inciting Native Americans to fight the settlers in the West. And that's going to lead to the whole thing of the War of 1812. And they wanted to, the U.S. wanted to conquer Canada, so they set forces on Lake Erie and Lake Champlain, but they couldn't prevent the British from marching on D.C. and burning the the White House, and Capitol buildings. Yes, it was burned. It was attacked. Star-Spangled Banner. The Brits received heavy defense by Americans in Baltimore. After bombarding the harbor, the British abandoned their attack for the night. With the side of the flag still flying at dawn, that inspired Francis Scott Key to write the Star-Spangled Banner, which would become our national anthem. While battles were still raging, peace talks had begun in the city of Ghent in Europe. It's called the Treaty of Ghent, and that ends the war, restoring pre-war boundaries, but did not mention neutral rights or impressment. Impressment is that where the Brits were seizing, kidnapping Americans and taking them back to join the British Army. That's impressment. The treaty did not say anything about that. This does, however, increase national prestige overseas and newfound sense of patriotism. We just defeated the British again. It destroyed the Federalist Party, of course, because the Federalist Party at the time strictly opposed the war. And when you oppose one thing that's super liked, you kind of lose favor. Unaware that the fighting had stopped, Andrew Jackson led his troops to a decisive battle at the Battle of New Orleans and will become a national hero, decisively beating the British. So the war kind of ended in a stalemate, but this little battle kind of like elevated the Americans a little bit more. And that is it. Hold on real quick. Again, Mr. Ovalle does not have the textbook in front of him. So hopefully you guys did enjoy that lecture. I know it was a little bit long, but again, still important. Wow, Mr. Ovalle. So your homework is page 29, lesson 2 review, questions. Oh, I should stop sharing. Questions 2, 3, and 4, page 29, 2, 3, and 4. Anyways, that's going to do it for this lecture. Hopefully you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure you hit that like button. I don't know if I asked a question for a comment, but if you want to leave a comment, let me know. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Remember, stay safe, wash your hands. Peace.